Finally, representation matters. The Commission called on school board and educators, school board educators and leaders to reflect the diverse demographics of Ontario and of their local communities. When students see leaders and educators who look like them, they see possibilities.
We just heard from Michael Harris, he, him, of course, Assistant Director of the Ontario Human Rights Commission. He was promoting their new anti-Black racism action plan for schools. Sounds great. But it really looks like the education bureaucrats in Canada are no longer hiding their project of politicization. And let me tell you, if this document doesn't alert you to what's happening in reality, I don't think I can help you anymore. So today we're going to talk about the continuing acceleration of these woke policies in school. And what I mean by that is obviously the sacralization of things like race, gender, sex, sexuality, gender identity, all that stuff, and how it's not going to end up good. So thanks for joining me. I'm Melanie Bennett, co-host of the Canadian Culture Wars Report. Let's just jump straight in, shall we? Okay, so this document was released 2 weeks ago. It's called Dreams Delayed, addressing systemic anti-Black racism and discrimination in Ontario's public education system. You can go read it. In fact, I encourage you to do so. That is my goal with making these videos. But I'm going to talk about the associated recommendations. So they have what they're calling a compendium of recommendations following the document that they put out, the Dreams Delayed that they put out. And it's called Anti-Black Racism in Education, Compendium of Recommendation. There are, maybe 190 or so recommendations. It's a huge document, but they do not disappoint. So first off, let's see what their definition of anti-Black racism is. So from the document, it says, anti-Black racism is prejudice, attitudes, beliefs, stereotyping, and discrimination that is directed at people of African descent and rooted in their unique history and experience of enslavement and its legacy. Anti-Black racism is deeply entrenched in Canadian institutions, policies, and practices to the extent that it is either functionally normalized or rendered invisible to the larger white society. Functionally normalized or rendered invisible. So it's invisible racism. Anti-Black racism is manifest in the current social, economic, and political marginalization of African Canadians, which include unequal opportunities to lower socioeconomic status, higher unemployment, significant poverty rates, and overrepresentation in the criminal justice system. So this is the Government of Ontario, their own definition of anti-Black racism. So right off the bat, this is a very specific definition of what it is. This is an anti-racist definition of what racism is. I'll just say it again. Functionally normalized or rendered invisible. Okay. So just to go over that a little bit here, anti-racism isn't what a lot of people understand it to be. And I know a lot of my viewers might understand this already, but I'll just go over it again. So anti-racism or being anti-racist does not mean not being racist. And the people in this sphere of anti-racist policymaking really don't understand it as not being racist. In fact, they actively say that's not what it is. So we're going to go over a little bit of that today. So in essence, not being racist means avoiding personal prejudice or discrimination based on race, which is good. But anti-racism goes a little bit further, focusing on race. Okay, so being conscious of race consciousness, in order to be actively challenging and dismantling systems of racism in society. But remember, they can be invisible. So not challenging invisible racism is considered racist and must be eliminated. So challenging anti-racist policies, which they do need to be challenged, is considered racism. So there's no questioning the ideology because of people's personal lived experience, but also because this ideology is circular, and no matter what you do, unless you're in line with it, then you're racist. And the whole point is eliminating all racism. So do you see what I mean? Like it's a little bit confusing. So I want to listen to one of the most respected experts in anti-racism education. So Dr. ABC is Dr. Andrew B. Campbell. He's a very, very well-respected academic at the Ontario Institute for Studies Education, which is associated with the University of Toronto. And he does a lot of courses on anti-racist teaching and activist pedagogy and so on and so forth. So let's listen to what this extremely well-respected academic has to say, or teacher trainer, he's training future teachers, has to say about anti-racism and not being racist.
To leave you with that. And then this other visual I saw. This is the second one I fell in love with. This is my favorite one, and this is second one I fell in love with. And it talks about the difference between anti-racist and I am not racist. Because when you say you are not racist, then you're going to the color blind, right? I don't see color. We want you to see color. So if there's anybody here out of the 81 persons that are in the room who are still using that phrase, I want you to stop using it as of tonight. We want you to see color. We understand where it's coming from. It's coming from a good place that you think everybody's equal. Well, everybody's not equal. Everybody's not being treated equal. And you think that, well, everybody have a chance. Everybody do not have a chance. There are people tonight, right as we are speaking, right in our neighborhoods and in Toronto and in nearby areas, trying to figure out where they will sleep tonight. I'm not trying to figure that out. I have a beautiful bed. There are people here who are trying, in this world, who are thinking, where will I get my next meal? I am not one of those persons. I just had sushi for dinner. So I want you to understand, sometimes, especially when you walk in certain power and privilege, we kind of do not understand the world around us, and we say things that are actually ridiculous. So we want you to see color. I don't want you to erase me. I want you to tell your friend, I went to this meeting tonight online, and this drop-dead gorgeous black man was the speaker. I want you to see me. So when you...
Okay. I mean, you can go watch it on my Twitter, but there you go. He wants you to see race because colorblindness is a ridiculous idea. So let me take you back to the first recommendation that I'm going to bring up here. It's number 60. It says school boards should require those involved in training educators in the principles and practices of anti-Black racism and race relations must have the appropriate background. So Dr. ABC, that's who they're talking about. Knowledge and or certification in anti-Black racism in education and race relations training to provide sufficient supports in these areas. And they quote this Professor Day, this is George Day, who is actually one of these the scholars at OISE as well, who is a colleague of Dr. ABC. So there we have it. One of the recommendations is right there in the document saying that what we just heard from Dr. ABC is the kind of training that they want to mandate for all teachers. Now, I'm just going to show you another clip from Dr. ABC.
Before I even show you the today's slide, the cover slide, I want to share with you a most powerful quote by Bettina Love, one of amazing author that I love, and I follow her work. I use her work in my work. She said, pedagogy, regardless of its name, is useless without teachers dedicated to challenging systematic oppression with intersectional social justice. So I always tell people, you know, I like a good lesson plan, I like a good committee, I like a good plan, I like all of those things. But those things really are not the biggest thing for me. Because regardless of what you call pedagogy, if it's not challenging oppression around you, if it's not calling in and calling out, if it's not providing liberatory education, if it's not holding our students at high expectation, if it's not disrupting, then it's not doing the work.
Okay, so there we have it. He's telling you that education, you know, curriculum and lesson planning and all that is, you know, that's a part of education. But the most important part of education really is this anti-oppression, really is this social, intersectional social justice, this ideology that is causing so much trouble for citizens and for the students and also teachers, just people in general. So that is the most important thing. And this is one of the most respected people teaching this stuff, right? So we're going to see a lot more of that based on what the OHRC Dreams Delayed is telling us. And so if that didn't solidify it for us, the recommendation 45, this recommendation for the Ministry of Education, says the ministry should require education in anti-colonial and critical race theory, specifically critical race theory called out, with a specific focus on anti-Black racism as part of all education programs in Ontario, including not only elementary and secondary school educator training programs, but also early childhood education programs. So it should be everywhere. So this kind of training, the kind of training that puts academics second and activism first, that should be mandatory. And it absolutely needs to be based in critical race theory. So this is the kind of stuff that America has rejected because of all the problems that it's caused. But here it is accelerating with direction from a legal body. So think about that for a moment. And it says the ministry should develop human rights education materials that foster respect for and appreciation of diversity and ensure that all educators receive the necessary support to teach children's rights in school. So they're alluding to this new human rights-based approach to education, which in my view, I've been calling it the radicalization of education, the politicization of education. That's what we're talking about. So they're calling it the human rights-based approach to education, which is a legally strong-armed enforcement of woke ideology in schools. That's what it is. And interestingly, one of the recommendations for school boards is that they should incorporate equity and anti-racism competencies into job descriptions, as well as the hiring promotion criteria for all educators, school administrators, and school staff. So there's a lot of discussion now about this happening in university, where everyone who's applying for a job has to declare their allegiance to this ideology. And this is cementing it within schooling. School boards should ensure that regulated health professionals, so psychologists, social workers, speech pathologists, reflect the diversity of the local community, ensuring that all regulated health professionals are able to provide culturally appropriate services to Black students through their anti-racist lens. The Ontario Human Rights Commission Right to Read Report 2022 called out specifically culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy as a source of, or the main reason, the main driver behind why kids can't read. So it's a concern to me. And also they one of the things they pointed out is that some of the people that were most astutely picking up on this and saying that kids, the methods that aren't being, or the kids are not doing well because of these practices were the psychologists, the social workers, the speech pathologists specifically. So it's interesting that this was put in there because this is contradicting their previous 2022 Right to Read. But that's a whole other kettle of fish. I have talked about the Right to Read report in another video if you'd like to go watch that. So school board trustees should ensure equity-related competencies are included in the job description and performance appraisals of the Director of Education. So currently there is, and also school board trustees should ensure that the hiring process candidates for the Director of Education are asked about issues in education equity, racism, and oppression, and their demonstrated commitment to education equity and their plans to address the identified issues in their new roles. This is a concern because right now there is a large number of citizens who are engaging, often for the first time, in the political system because they see that there's problems with education and they want to put in or elect what they're calling common sense trustees into boards across Ontario. Now, this kind of thing would make that job impossible. If you're a common sense trustee, you wouldn't be able to go against this ideology without being removed or in breach of the policy. So that's a real concern right now. Let's not even go into how this is an affront to free expression, to free speech, to be able to have your own view, your own political lens or social lens, your own way of viewing the world. This is telling you must see the world this way. So it's a furthering of the crushing of free expression in Canada. This one I found curious. Recommendation 81 says, given the importance of mentoring and networks to advancement within school boards should create opportunities for Black educators to network with white and other staff. So this seems to be implying that if you're like Black educators or like white and other staff are not including Black educators because they're Black, that seems to be what it's implying. And then the next recommendation after that says, school boards should create and support Black employee networks. At the same time, it's saying, it's implying that white people are excluding Black people because they're Black and they should include them, which, to be fair, why aren't they? Of course, everyone should be included in staff networks and things like that. But at the same time, it's saying you should include them, but they should also have their segregated networks. So we're creating segregation while saying segregation is bad. So let's look at the faculties of education. 47, faculties should offer courses in anti-racism, anti-sexism, anti-classism education. The program should focus on all aspects of formal, hidden, and deep curriculum, in addition to examining educator expectations and how this can thwart or encourage the educational opportunities of their students. Faculty should develop detailed guidelines for the evaluation of teaching, learning materials, and resources of any forms of bias, gender, cultural, racial. So again, we're looking for these microaggressions. We're going to give you guidelines on how to suss it out. These little ghosts that exist that nobody can see, we're going to suss them out. So we're making a lot of assumptions on what people are thinking. And we're not taking people in good faith on what they're saying. We're sort of like interpreting it, right? And it's always in a negative light. We're always looking for the no-nos. 49 says faculties should offer mandatory professional development for all educators in the publicly funded school system with continuing certification every 5 years. Dependent on both satisfactory performance, blah, 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 the College of Teachers. Because obviously anti-racism and woke ideology in general is always changing. They're always changing the goalposts. So you got to keep recertifying, right? Because the goalposts are going to change. Faculty should make trauma-informed anti-racism, anti-oppression, and equity-based strategies for teaching mandatory parts of their program. So again, it's just like a whole lot of that Dr. ABC. Like, we're just going to make that the most important. And he told you it's the most important part of education. Already it's taken over most of education, but it's just going to get worse. We're going to do it more and more. And it's mandated legally by a body that is imposing this on schools. And again, let me take you back to the Ontario Human Rights Commission 2022 report called Right to Read. And in there, the OHRC, like I said previously, called out this culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy as the reason for why kids are unable to read. Okay, and the picture might actually be worse because a lot of students are on their own what are they called? IEPs. So they can't actually be tested at EQAO levels. So even in the report, it says that the picture is probably worse than even their reporting. And this CRRP, this culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy, it could be whatever you see culturally responsive, culturally relevant, culturally sensitive, all that this is it. And it is essentially a action plan for implementing critical race theory. So when they tell you critical race theory isn't in schools, of course not. It's a theoretical idea in university, but there are methods that use this as a basis for how to apply it. So the applied form is CRRP. And for school boards, 51, it says, school boards should create trauma-informed and culturally safe school environments and provide comprehensive, sustained, and job-embedded training for educators on trauma-informed and culturally safe practices. This trauma, everything's about trauma. There's a lot of mental health is a whole other area in schools that I'm still getting my head around that I'm going to have to report on at some point. And school boards should implement ongoing educator education to help reduce anti-Black racism, ensure culturally appropriate pedagogy, and ensure curriculum that reflects the full diversity. So this stuff sounds kind of okay on the surface when you're reading through it. You need to be able to read what it means. And so what this is saying is that, and culturally appropriate practice and so on and so forth, it's not just about race. It can be about gender identity and all these different things, right? It's a whole suite of intersectional identities. So what it's saying is that a student, you must see race, so you must be race conscious or identity conscious or culturally conscious, so that you must see children as lots of different categories. And then based on those categories, you need to make assumptions about their circumstances, or maybe they'll tell you why they can't achieve certain goals or do certain things. And then you treat them accordingly. Normally what would happen in the past is that there's a standard to which you test, or to which there's a bar to cross over. And they're saying, well, that bar is unfair. That bar is part of the colonial white supremacist system coming from Europe. That doesn't take into account all these identities. So we need to look at the identities and make a different plan based on identities, right? To reduce the trauma of trying to get over that bar. It is eliminating standards. And it's eliminating standards based on assumptions on people's identities. I'm not going to read through all of these, but there's a lot of talk about data. And it starts really, well, at least I've noticed it starting in the 2017 Education Equity Action Plan, requiring schools to develop this system of data collection, which is fine. Data is good in schools, but it's not about improving achievement. It's about this equity, this culturally responsive equity, right? And they use something called disparity reports. So they're looking for gaps and anything in the system that shows a difference. And these differences are always going to be based on identity. Anything that shows the difference means that there needs to be some kind of adjustment to bridge that gap. Ultimately, it is unscientific. The methodology is pseudo-analysis. And let me explain why. Because children in school are primed all the time with this thinking. They're primed that there are microaggressions. They're primed that people might not accept them. They're primed that they may be an oppressor or a oppressed group. There's all this priming in this ideology. And then some questionnaires come into them and ask them questions like, do you feel safe? Do you feel people have different standards for you because of your identity? So on and so forth. And so when you're primed, you're going to answer differently than if you were not primed. So this is why I'm calling it pseudo-analysis, because it's a twisted version of the truth, but it looks real. This is about to become standardized, and there's been some efforts to do that over the last few years, but this is just a push to make that even more mandated. And for some reason, the Ontario Human Rights Commission in their recommendation, this Dreams Delayed, appears to be calling out Catholic schools for some reason. No other schools. They're not calling out any other religious groups, just Catholics, not even Christians, just Catholics. It says the ministry should conduct a full investigation into the suspension, expulsion, and discipline tactics in schools across Ontario. I tried to look for other callouts, religious callouts, but I couldn't find them. So Catholics, OHRC is not a big fan of you for some reason. Let's have a little listen to some of the representatives of the Human Rights Commission. So at the beginning, there was this video from Mike Harris, and that was part of a media release that they did online. There's like 1,000 views, which is all right, the reasonable amount of views. But they're talking about the reasons why they're doing all of this. So yeah, it's this media release, press release about the document. And this is Dr. Grace Monroe. She is director of the Black Scholarship Institute at Toronto Metropolitan University. And she's going to give us another overview of what the purpose of this action plan is.
So today I ask, how are our children? With a heavy heart, the children are not well. We often are told that education is the great equalizer. Yet for many Black students, education has become a site of exclusion rather than empowerment, of racial harm rather than radical possibility. The legacy of anti-Black racism in education runs deep in our system, from the segregation of Black children in Ontario's early schools to today's reality of disproportionate discipline, streaming, racial harassment, and curriculum erasure. And so we must ask ourselves, what becomes possible when education in Ontario is reimagined as a space of affirmation, empowerment, and liberation? I believe that this action plan is about reclaiming that possibility. It's a call to action that insists that Black students must be fully seen, must be fully supported, and empowered to not just thrive, but also to flourish.
We hear about liberation again. Liberation is a theme this education is supposed to be emancipatory, liberatory. Dr. ABC talked about that as well. They're talking about dismantling, disrupting. I believe that there's an imagined perfect future where discrimination is completely eliminated, which they talk about, completely eradicating discrimination. Now, that is an admirable goal. This liberation sounds really nice, but let's look a little bit deeper into that. Recommendation 5, the ministry and school board should work together to develop a consistent method for measuring student success indicators. Student success indicators is a key phrase, including standardized reading measures, EQAO assessment results, academic pathway, whether the student has taken academic, applied, or locally developed courses, and whether they have modified curriculum expectations, credit accumulation, graduation rates, and post-secondary application, acceptance, and attendance. They should explore ways boards can disaggregate this data by subset of students to identify and act on equity gaps. So in the past, success indicator might be, are they passing, right? So the idea that most of us have are there is a, 50% you pass or whatever the benchmark is for you to pass. And passing usually means you have correctly answered specific questions. So there's a benchmark that you have answered these questions correctly. So the number associated with you or the grade associated with you is a reflection on you getting things correct. But that's not what they mean. So when they're talking about student success indicators, so achievement or success means something very different. That can be on all kinds of measures. So it can be on things like your engagement, your communication, your identity. You might get something for that as well. So they're finding new ways to create success that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with getting the question correct, because that would be a colonial construct, right? So decolonize is about getting rid of all that, right? It's about various ways of knowing. Culturally appropriate could be maybe there's an Islamic way of knowing. Maybe there is a Jewish way of knowing. Maybe there's a Black way of knowing. So all these different ways of knowing, need to be taken into account. So we're getting kids who are going into the system that there might not be a lot of conformity, and they might all have the same grade and not all have the same knowledge. So that's worth taking into account. Says number 14, the ministry should decolonize the curriculum and prioritize Black history. Black Canadian experiences must be built into all school curriculums. I'm fine with Black history. I don't think I have a problem with that. My problem is decolonize the curriculum. Again, it's just another version. It's just another recommendation to eliminate the so-called, white testing standard. And that is a problem. And in fact, that's a problem even for the most marginalized students, poor students, the actual Black students that they're trying to help. This is not actually helpful. What else have we got here? Oh, the ministry should establish student assessment and testing instruments and practices that recognize racial, cultural, and gender diversity. Again, just what I'm saying. Testing should take these into account. Just getting the question correct is not enough. Ministry should analyze student achievement data using an intersectional approach. This allows for an analysis of outcomes for Black male and female students and will help to identify and address the issues faced by Black students who are also LGBTQIS plus 2S and or Muslim, as well as Black students with disabilities. The reason I wanted to mention this one is simply just to highlight that anti-Black racism policies isn't just about Black students. It's all intersectional. It's really the whole suite of things, although they will prioritize people who happen to have a darker skin tone who may or may not have come from Africa. Number 37, school boards should support student engagement in their own learning. Students plan their own learning. So it's not necessarily the teacher or the school that plans your learning. The student plans their own learning by providing students with culturally responsive learning opportunities. So you plan your own learning based on whatever identity category that you might be in to be culturally relevant. And that's the ability to demonstrate their learning in a variety of ways and opportunity to use a variety of sources. Again, it's sort of hinting at what I'm trying to say here is that standards are a white colonial project. We don't want that. We want it to be based on your identity and cultural sensitivity. But what that means is that because you might be from, I was going to say Germany, but that's the wrong country, from Malawi, there's something inherent about you because you're from Malawi that means that you have your own way of learning. So you have to develop your own learning plan and strategies that is responsive to your culture. And then we have to find ways to develop strategies to assess your learning based on that culture. So if you're a teacher and there's kids from 20 different countries in your class, you have to do that for all of those students, not even to mention disabled students who might be in there, or maybe you have, students who identify as LGBTQI2S, as they say. So that's a lot of work if you've got 30 students in your class. So let's listen to another little clip from the media release. Here we have the Chief Commissioner of the Ontario Human Rights Commission talking about the Dreams Delayed Action Plan.
Within Ontario's education system, racial discrimination and harassment continue to cast a shadow over the lives of Black children, youth, educators, and education workers. Laws, policies, and practices which perpetrate prejudice, bias, beliefs, and stereotypes have been embedded in Ontario's education system. Today, the Commission calls on all duty holders in Ontario's education system to perform their responsibility and legal duties under the Ontario Human Rights Code to improve outcomes for Black students, Black educators, so they can learn and teach in school environments free from discrimination and harassment.
Thank you so much for making it to the end. As you may or may not know, I've been working on this for quite some time, pretty much on my own dime. But now we're facing some costs. We have been putting in so many FOIs and putting in so much effort to get you the information from the inside. Now, unfortunately, FOIs, they fight it. The government does not like revealing information. And that's why I've teamed up with the Emberlight Project, which is a small nonprofit whose main goal is to bring accountability and transparency to government systems. So if you can donate some money, $5, $10, $50, hell, $500 if you can, I've set up a Give, Send, Go. Please consider donating. That would really help bring a lot of this information forward a lot quicker. Thanks for watching.